The time now is 11 minutes to 8. Saudi Arabia is being accused of using football to try to change its image around the world, of sports washing. The country, which has faced strong criticism for its human rights record, has been buying star players like Cristiano Ronaldo from European leagues. The Manchester City manager, Pep Guardiola, recently lost one of his star players, Riyad Mahrez, to a team in the Saudi Pro League on a reported weekly salary of £750,000. He said over the weekend that the country's dominance in football is something we must now accept as a reality.
The Saudi League changed completely the market. A year ago, when Cristiano was the first player went there, anyone could imagine how amount the top quality, extraordinary players is going to play in the Saudi League. I think in the future, in the close future, it's going to happen more and more. It's not about the threat, it's a reality. They want to create a strong league, and what they are doing so far, the only league can do it right now, Saudi League.
Former England and Liverpool star Jamie Carragher wrote recently that this poses a threat to the wealth, power and quality of European football. I'm worried about where it will end. I've been speaking to Talal Al-Maghrabi, who's president of the Saudi British Marketing and Management Association. He's currently in Saudi Arabia, and asked why Saudi Arabia is taking this interest in sport.
Saudi Arabia is leading the Arab world, so that will also inspire the Arab countries to have a very meaningful way of using sports to have the right status for the countries as well as for the citizen. And you will see most of the countries are using sports to attract tourism, to diversify the economy, to have an impact and status for the country, as well as change the mind to better quality of life.
Although it's also been seen as what's called sports washing, in other words, that Saudi Arabia is trying to use football to veil over its human rights record.
Anything you can do, it will be seen as sports washing.
But what we're talking about is the Saudi Arabia's record on human rights, in particular if we look at gay rights, where homosexual relations are illegal and can be subject to very severe penalties, including in some circumstances the death penalty.
If you see, for example, the death penalty or any other issues, I think all the people in Saudi Arabia in support of this, because it is making the country very stable, making the country very safe and secure. If you are talking just about one or two cases compared to a very stable country for the last 300 years and moving very fast in this economy, this is not like a sports wash.
Well, that was Talal Al-Maghrabi. We've also been speaking to David Waring, who's a lecturer in international relations at the University of Sussex and an expert in UK-Saudi relations. He says the regime is using sport to help improve its reputation.
It's effectively a PR campaign. It's not because the Saudi regime has suddenly discovered a great love of sport. This is part of a wider, quote-unquote, reform programme that the Saudis are pushing through. I think the key thing here is that the Saudis aren't intending to reform the country in a way that people actually want. So it is really just a question of distraction. The Saudis aren't going to grant basic human rights to LGBTQ people. That's not going to happen. Similarly, the Saudis aren't going to suddenly allow political space, which has been shrunk considerably in recent years under Mohammed bin Salman. So it really is a question of just projecting a positive image in other ways and hoping that people shut up about those other issues, or the people who do want to talk about those other issues are drowned out by all the talk about sport, about football, golf, Formula One.
David Waring. Well, we can talk now to Alex Phillips, who is independent advisor to FIFA and a former UEFA executive. Good morning.
Good morning.
Before we get on to the geopolitics, if you like, of this, let's just begin with what it will mean for football in the UK and in Europe. How much of a threat do you think the amounts of money that Saudi Arabian football is able to pay what kind of impact is that likely to have here?
Well, I don't think that the concerns of Pep Guardiola and others are really that well founded when it comes to a challenge to the power and status of the Premier League or the Champions League or any of the other big leagues in Europe. it's just simply not possible. No matter how much money you have, it's just not possible to buy success like that. Most of the players that have gone there are over 30. We'll see, but I don't think they should worry about that. I think the worry would be more about further takeover of community assets, which is what clubs are, and the ability of the regulators in football, FIFA, UEFA, Premier League, the FA, to resist money and the power of money and all the other problems that come with this, like multi-club ownership, one owner buying up many different clubs. So the problems are not on the field. I think if Manchester City or Liverpool lose a player to Saudi Arabia, well, that's what small and medium-sized clubs have been suffering for many, many years when they lose a player to Liverpool or Manchester City. So I don't think it's a major issue.
Are you keeping an eye on what's happening in Newcastle?
Sorry?
And what about Newcastle?
Well, this is, I think, an example. I mean, they've actually done a good job there. If you look at the results and in terms of the approach, in terms of hiring a good English coach, not going out to try and buy the best, most expensive coach in the world, and the same using players that were already there. And they did well last season. I think the issue is more about what is the role of the fans in the club. Why are the fans not able to take a stake in the club? And maybe the government missed a trick there with the white paper.
And then just looking at the motivations for Saudi Arabia, we heard a view from the country itself, or inside the country, talking about that it was just a long-standing interest in sport, but then some very serious criticisms about Saudi's human rights record and the idea that it's doing this to try and project a positive image in the world. Is that a concern?
Well, I think that's an element for sure, in the same way that any country will use sports events or their activities in sports to try to improve their image. So that is a factor. I mean, I don't personally think it's the biggest factor, because has it worked for Qatar? You know, they started investing in sport around 20 years ago, and I'm not sure their reputation in terms of human rights is much better than it was back then. So I'm not sure that is the primary reason, but it's certainly an element. But it's more, I think, about influence, soft power, diversification of the economy, and the rivalry that was mentioned by previous speakers with other countries within the Muslim world and the Arab world.
But do you think the human rights record is an issue for international football? I mean, given that there have been very strong campaigns in this country on gay rights, but what about internationally?
Absolutely, it's an issue, yeah, for sure. In the same way that it must be an issue for governments as well, who deal and are close to states with poor human rights records.
Thank you very much indeed for talking to us.